They say no good deed goes unpunished, but for Sarah Jenkins, one good deed nearly cost her everything before it gave her the world. She was just a waitress on the brink of eviction, and he was just a shivering, confused old man who couldn't pay for a bowl of tomato soup. Everyone else in the diner saw a vagrant. Sarah saw a human being. She swiped her card to cover his tab, a grand total of $12.50. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. The next morning, a black limousine pulled up to the diner, and a lawyer handed her a heavy, iron key. That key didn't just open a door, it unlocked a dark family secret, a missing fortune, and a fight for her life. This is the story of how a bowl of soup changed history. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker. That's how Sarah Jenkins felt as she leaned against the counter of the Rusty Spoon, watching the water streak down the grease-stained window. It was 8:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The dinner rush, if you could call 3 truckers and a couple of college students a rush, had died down. Sarah rubbed her lower back, her uniform smelling of stale fryer oil and cheap coffee. She checked the pocket of her apron. $42 in tips. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Her brother, Leo, needed his insulin refill by Friday, and the landlord, Mr. Henderson, had already left a bright orange notice on their apartment door. "Sarah, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean." The voice grated against her nerves like sandpaper. It was Rick, the manager. Rick was a man who wore too much cologne and wielded his tiny amount of power like a medieval broadsword. "I'm wiping down the pie case, Rick," Sarah lied, grabbing a rag. The bell above the door jingled, a pathetic, tinny sound that barely cut through the drumming of the rain. A gust of cold, wet air swept through the diner, making Sarah shiver. She looked up to see a figure standing in the doorway. He was drenched. He wore a coat that might have been grey wool once, but was now a sodden, dark charcoal, patchy with age. He wore a newsboy cap pulled low, and his hands, clutching a cane, were trembling violently. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like a ghost that had wandered in from the storm. "Table for one?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. She knew the type. He likely didn't have money, just wanted to sit somewhere dry for 10 minutes before Rick kicked him out. The old man looked up. His eyes were a piercing, watery blue, surrounded by a map of deep wrinkles. "Just a warm seat, miss, if I may." "Sit anywhere you like," she said. He shuffled to booth 4, the one with the torn vinyl seat that they usually reserved for people they didn't want staying long. He sat down with a heavy sigh that seemed to deflate his entire small frame. Sarah walked over with a menu and a glass of water. "Coffee to start." "Please," he rasped. "And the tomato soup. Is it hot?" "Steaming," Sarah promised. She went back to the kitchen, dodging Rick, who was aggressively counting inventory on hamburger buns. When she brought the coffee and soup out, the old man was staring at the table surface, as if reading invisible writing. He ate slowly, his shaking hand spilling a few drops of red soup onto his beard. He looked starved, not just for food, but for comfort. Sarah watched him from the counter, feeling a familiar ache in her chest. He reminded her of her grandfather, before the dementia took him, before everything fell apart. When he was finished, he patted his pockets. He patted his chest, then his sides, then the interior of his wet coat. The panic on his face was instant and heartbreaking. He stood up, knocking the cane over with a clatter. "My wallet," he whispered. I had it." Rick's radar for trouble pinged immediately. He marched out from the back office, smelling blood. "Problem here?" "I am so sorry," the old man stammered, his dignity crumbling. I seem to have misplaced my wallet. I live just down on 4th Street. If I could just run and—" "Save it," Rick snapped, crossing his arms. "The I forgot my wallet scam? Really? It's $12.50, old man. Pay up or I'm calling the cops. We've got a strict policy on vagrants." "I am not a vagrant," the man said, his voice gaining a sudden, surprising steeliness before faltering again. "I'm Arthur Pennyworth, and I assure you I can pay." "Then pay," Rick sneered. He reached for the phone behind the counter. "You have 30 seconds before I dial 911. Theft of services." The old man, Arthur, looked at Sarah. His eyes were wide, terrified. A police interaction could be a death sentence for someone his age in his condition. The stress alone could kill him. Sarah didn't think. She just acted. "Stop, Rick," she said. "Stay out of this, Jenkins, unless you want to join him on the street." Sarah reached into her apron. She pulled out the wad of crumpled bills she had made that night. The insulin money, the rent money. She peeled off a 10 and 3 ones. "Here." She slammed the money onto the counter. "He's covered. Keep the change." Rick stared at the money, then at Sarah. He smirked, snatching the cash. "Suit yourself, but don't expect sympathy when you're crying about your rent next week." Rick stormed off to the register. Sarah turned to Arthur. He was trembling again, but this time it seemed to be from emotion. "You didn't have to do that, my dear," Arthur said softly. "It's just soup, Arthur," Sarah said, forcing a smile, though her stomach was in knots about the lost money. "Nobody deserves to go to jail over soup. Go home. Get dry." Arthur reached out and took her hand. His skin was ice cold, but his grip was firm. "What is your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." "Sarah Jenkins," he repeated, testing the weight of the syllables. "You have a kind heart. That is a rare currency in this city. Rarer than gold." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, slightly damp napkin. He had written something on it in shaky handwriting. He placed it in her hand. "I cannot pay you back today," Arthur said, "but I never leave a debt unpaid." He tipped his cap, grabbed his cane, and walked back out into the rain. Sarah looked at the napkin. It didn't have a phone number. It just had a quote, written in elegant, old-fashioned script. "Virtue is not the absence of vice, but the conquest of it." She crumpled the napkin and tossed it in the trash. Philosophy wouldn't pay the electric bill. She had 2 hours left on her shift, and she needed to hustle. The next morning, the alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m. Sarah hit snooze twice before dragging herself out of bed. The apartment was freezing. The heating unit had been making a death rattle for weeks, and she was terrified to call the landlord to fix it, fearing it would just remind him she was late on rent. She checked on Leo. Her younger brother was asleep on the pull-out couch, his breathing shallow. He looked pale. She checked his insulin supply in the fridge. 2 days left. Maybe 3 if she stretched it. The knot in her stomach tightened. "I'll fix it, Leo," she whispered to the sleeping boy. "I promise." She arrived at the Rusty Spoon at 6:45 a.m. for the opening shift. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a grey, oppressive humidity. The diner was empty except for the cook, Marco, who was scraping the grill. "Morning, sunshine," Marco grunted. "Rick's on a warpath today. Inventory is short." "Rick's always on a warpath," Sarah muttered, tying her apron. By 9:00 a.m. the breakfast rush was in full swing. Sarah was juggling 4 tables, pancakes for table 6, egg whites for the lady in the corner, and endless coffee refills for the regulars. She was exhausted, her feet throbbing in her worn-out sneakers. Then, the atmosphere in the diner changed. It wasn't a sound, it was a silence. The chatter at the tables died down. The clinking of silverware stopped. Sarah looked up from pouring coffee to see what everyone was staring at. A car had pulled up to the curb. Not a taxi, not a delivery truck. It was a Bentley. A sleek, black, vintage Bentley that looked like it cost more than the entire city block. It gleamed under the grey sky, looking completely out of place in front of the grease-stained diner. The driver's door opened, and a chauffeur in a full cap and uniform stepped out. He walked around to the back passenger door and opened it. A man stepped out. He was tall, in his 40s, wearing a navy pinstripe suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. He carried a leather briefcase and checked a gold pocket watch. He looked like he owned a bank, or perhaps a small country. He walked straight toward the diner door. "Health inspector?" Marco hissed from the kitchen window. "In a Bentley?" Sarah whispered back. "I doubt it." The man entered the diner. He didn't wait to be seated. He scanned the room with a hawk-like intensity. Rick came rushing out from the back, wiping his hands on his pants, his eyes bulging at the sight of a wealthy potential customer. "Welcome, sir. Welcome to the Rusty Spoon." Rick beamed, putting on his best fake smile. "Right this way. I have a private booth in the back." The man ignored Rick completely. He didn't even look at him. His eyes landed on Sarah, who was standing near the coffee station, holding a pot. He walked straight up to her. Up close, he smelled of expensive tobacco and cedarwood. "Are you Miss Sarah Jenkins?" he asked. His voice was a deep baritone, commanding but polite. Sarah swallowed hard. Her first thought was debt collectors. But debt collectors didn't drive Bentleys. Her second thought was the police. Did Arthur steal something? Was I an accessory? "I am," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. The man nodded. "My name is James Sterling. I am the senior partner at Sterling, Vance, and more." The entire diner was listening now. Even the guy eating eggs had his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked. "Quite the contrary," Sterling said. He placed his briefcase on the nearest table, table 4, the same one Arthur had sat at the night before. He clicked the latches open. Rick hovered behind him. "Is this about the service? Because if this employee has caused an issue, I assure you she will be dealt with." "Silence," Sterling said, without turning around. The word was spoken softly, but it hit Rick like a slap. Rick shut his mouth instantly. Sterling reached into the briefcase and pulled out a small velvet box and a thick envelope. "Yesterday evening you provided assistance to a gentleman named Arthur Pennyworth," Sterling stated. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. I just bought him soup. He forgot his wallet. Look, if he owes money, I don't have it." Sterling allowed a small, rare smile to touch his lips. "Mr. Pennyworth didn't forget his wallet, Miss Jenkins. Mr. Pennyworth owns the building this diner is in. In fact, Mr. Pennyworth owns this entire city block, along with significant holdings in real estate across the state." Sarah dropped the coffee pot. It didn't break, but it clattered loudly against the counter. "What?" "Arthur is eccentric," Sterling continued. "He likes to test the character of those who operate within his properties. He has been coming to this diner for 3 years in various disguises. Yesterday, however, was not a test. He was genuinely feeling unwell, and he was genuinely treated with cruelty by your manager, and with exceptional kindness by you." Rick made a choking sound in the background. "Mr. Pennyworth has instructed me to give you this," Sterling said. He opened the velvet box. Inside sat a key. It wasn't a modern house key. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, made of heavy iron, with an intricate design on the bow. It looked like something from a Gothic novel. "Is this a key to a house?" Sarah asked, bewildered. "Not exactly," Sterling said. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "This is the key to the Pennyworth estate in the High Hills. The main house has been shuttered for 20 years. Arthur has decided that his current living arrangements are insufficient for the work he needs to do. He wants you to meet him there." "Me? Why?" "Because," Sterling said, handing her the envelope. "He says you are the only one he trusts to help him find what was stolen." Sarah took the envelope. It was thick with cash. "This is an advance," Sterling said. $5,000 for your time, and to cover any medical expenses your brother may have." Sarah gasped. "How did you know about—" "Arthur knows everything, Miss Jenkins," Sterling said ominously. "But be warned, if you accept this key, you are not just accepting a job. You are stepping into a very complicated, very dangerous situation. Arthur's family, they are not happy about his sudden resurgence." Sarah looked at the key, then at the cash, then at Rick's pale, terrified face. She thought of Leo's insulin. She thought of the eviction notice. She reached out and took the key. The metal was cold and heavy in her palm. "I'll go," Sarah said. Sterling nodded. "Excellent. The car is waiting. We will take you there now." "Now! But I'm on shift," Sarah said, looking at Rick. Sterling turned to Rick, his eyes cold as ice. "Mr. Rick, was it? You are fired, effective immediately. The new ownership management will be in touch regarding your severance, which, given your conduct, will be 0. As Rick stammered, Sarah untied her apron and threw it on the counter. She grabbed her purse and followed James Sterling out to the Bentley. As she slid into the leather back seat, she thought her luck had finally turned. She had no idea that she wasn't being driven to a sanctuary. She was being driven into a war zone. The drive to the High Hills took 40 minutes, winding upward through a landscape that shifted from grey concrete to lush, manicured greenery. But the silence inside the Bentley was louder than the engine. Sarah sat clutching the heavy iron key, her thumb tracing the ridges of the metal until her skin felt raw. James Sterling broke the silence as they passed a set of stone gargoyles marking the entrance to the exclusive district. "Sarah," he said, his tone shifting from professional to cautionary, "you need to understand what you are walking into. Arthur Pennyworth is not just a wealthy man. He is the patriarch of a dynasty that is currently imploding." "You mentioned his family," Sarah said, looking out the tinted window at the passing mansions. "I call them the vultures," Sterling said, adjusting his cufflinks. "There is his eldest daughter, Victoria. She runs the foundation, cold as ice and twice as sharp. And his son, Julian. He has a gambling problem that he disguises as venture capitalism. They filed a petition 3 days ago to have Arthur declared mentally incompetent." Sarah turned to him, shocked. "Incompetent? But he was lucid. He was kind. He was just sad." "Precisely," Sterling nodded. "But in their eyes, giving a stranger a napkin with a quote on it instead of calling the police is a sign of dementia. Walking in the rain without a security detail is a sign of madness. They want control of the trust, Sarah. And the only thing standing between them and Arthur's billions is, well, currently, it's you." The car slowed down. They had arrived. The Pennyworth estate was not like the other manicured homes. It was a Gothic leviathan of dark stone, sitting behind a 12-foot iron fence that was choked with ivy. The trees in the yard were overgrown, their branches skeletal and reaching, casting long shadows even in the daylight. The windows were dark, staring out like hollow eyes. But what drew Sarah's attention wasn't the house. It was the people at the gate. 2 cars were parked haphazardly in front of the locked iron driveway. a red Porsche and a silver Mercedes. A woman in a sharp white trench coat was screaming at the intercom box, while a man in a disheveled suit kicked the tires of his own car. That, Sterling sighed, is the family. As the Bentley pulled up, the woman in the white coat spun around. She was beautiful in a terrifying way, with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. This was Victoria. Sterling lowered the partition window. "Good morning, Mrs. van der Hoven." "Sterling!" Victoria shrieked, marching up to the Bentley. She slammed her hand on the window frame. "This is kidnapping. My father is missing. We know you have him in there. Open this gate immediately, or I will have the police break it down." The man, Julian, ran over, looking sweaty and desperate. "Just let us in, James. We just want to talk to Dad. We're worried about his health." "Your father is safe," Sterling said calmly, "and he has given strict instructions that he is not to be disturbed by family." "He's senile," Victoria spat. "He doesn't know what he's doing. Who is this?" She glared through the glass at Sarah. Her eyes narrowed, scanning Sarah's cheap waitress uniform, her worn shoes, her messy bun. "The help? You hired a maid while denying his own children access?" "She is not the help," Sterling said. "She is the guest of honor." Sterling turned to Sarah. "They cannot enter without the key. The electronic system was disabled by Arthur yesterday to prevent remote hacking. The only way in is that key in your hand. You have to open the gate." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Victoria's rage-filled face, then at the heavy key in her lap. She was just a waitress. She served coffee. She didn't fight billionaires. Virtue is the conquest of vice, she thought. Sarah opened the car door. The humidity hit her, along with the smell of expensive perfume and desperation. She stepped out, clutching the key. Victoria loomed over her, towering in high heels. "Give me that," Victoria commanded, holding out a manicured hand. "I don't know who you are, little girl, but you are out of your depth. Give me the key, and I'll give you $1,000 cash right now." Sarah looked at Victoria. She saw the same look Rick had in his eyes, the look that said people without money didn't matter. "No," Sarah said. Her voice was small but steady. "Excuse me?" Victoria scoffed. "I said no," Sarah said, louder this time. She walked past Victoria toward the rusted lock of the main gate. "Mr. Pennyworth invited me. He didn't invite you." Julian lunged forward. "You listen to me, you little—" Sterling stepped out of the car, his presence imposing. He didn't say a word. He just stood between Sarah and Julian. Julian backed down. Sarah reached the gate. Her hands were shaking, but she fit the heavy iron key into the lock. It groaned, a sound of metal grinding against years of disuse. She turned it with both hands. With a heavy clank, the mechanism released. She pushed the heavy gates open just wide enough for the Bentley to pass, then quickly locked them again from the inside as Victoria screamed obscenities and rattled the bars. Sarah got back into the car, her breathing ragged. "Well done," Sterling said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Now comes the hard part." The interior of the mansion was freezing. It was colder inside than it was outside. As Sarah stepped into the grand foyer, her footsteps echoed on the dusty marble floor. White sheets covered the furniture like ghosts in a graveyard. The air smelled of old paper, wax, and loneliness. "Arthur is in the library," Sterling whispered, as if speaking too loud might bring the house down. "Second floor, third door on the left. Go to him. I will stay here and ensure our guests remain outside." Sarah climbed the grand staircase, alone. The banister was covered in a thick layer of dust that coated her hand. She felt like an intruder in a museum of a lost civilization. She found the library door ajar. A faint yellow light spilled out. She pushed the door open. The library was massive, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that required ladders to reach the top. A fire was crackling weakly in the hearth, the only source of warmth in the house. Arthur Pennyworth sat in a leather wingback chair by the fire. He looked different than he had in the diner. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket that had seen better days, and he was clean-shaven, revealing a sharp, aristocratic jawline. But he looked frailer. His skin was translucent, like parchment paper. He looked up as she entered. A genuine smile broke across his face. "The girl with the tomato soup," he wheezed. "You came." "Mr. Sterling brought me," Sarah said, walking slowly toward him. "Mr. Pennyworth, your family is outside. They are very angry." "They are always angry," Arthur sighed, gesturing for her to sit on the ottoman opposite him. Anger is the only emotion they feel when their inheritance is threatened. "Please call me Arthur." Sarah sat down. "Arthur, why am I here? You gave me money. You got my boss fired. You gave me a key. But I don't know you." Arthur leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "You are here, Sarah, because you saw me. Yesterday I walked past 50 people. I stumbled. I looked lost. Do you know what they did? They looked through me. They looked away. To them I was debris. But you looked at me. You saw a human being." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He reached for a glass of water on the table, his hand shaking so badly the water slopped over the sides. Sarah instinctively reached out and steadied the glass for him, helping him drink. "Thank you," he whispered. That right there. That is why you are here." He set the glass down. "My children are trying to commit me. They say I have lost my mind. They have doctors on their payroll who will testify that I am incompetent. If they succeed, they will gain power of attorney. They will sell this house, liquidate my assets, and put me in a home until I die." "That's terrible," Sarah said. "It is murder by bureaucracy," Arthur said grimly. "But I have a fail-safe, a weapon. But I cannot find it." "What is it?" "A book," Arthur said. "A red leather ledger. For 30 years I have kept a record, not of finances but of transactions. Deals my son made with cartels to cover his gambling debts. Funds my daughter embezzled from the charity foundation to buy villas in Tuscany. Evidence. Undeniable proof of their corruption." He looked around the massive, shadowed room helplessly. "I hid it. I hid it 20 years ago, the day my wife died, to protect her from the truth of what our children had become. I hid it so well that now, in my old age, I cannot remember where it is." Sarah looked at the walls of books. There were thousands of them. "It's in this room." "I believe so," Arthur said, clutching his head. "I have fragments of memory, a hollow sound, the smell of cedar? No, sandalwood, and a bird, a golden bird." "A golden bird," Sarah repeated. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, the sound of shattering glass. Arthur jumped, clutching his chest. "They're in," he gasped. "They broke a window. Sterling can't stop them physically. He's a lawyer, not a bouncer." Heavy footsteps could be heard thudding on the marble downstairs. "Dad!" Victoria's voice screeched up the stairs, echoing like a banshee. "Dad, we know you're up there. We have Dr. Evans with us. He has a sedative for you." Arthur looked at Sarah, terror in his eyes. "If they find the ledger before I do, they will burn it, and then they will bury me. Sarah, you have fresh eyes. Look for the bird." Sarah stood up, her pulse racing. She spun around, scanning the room. Books, statues, paintings, a golden bird, hollow sound. "Where?" she whispered to herself. She ran to the fireplace. Nothing but soot. She ran to the desk. Nothing but papers. "Sarah," Arthur hissed. "They are on the stairs." She scanned the bookshelves, rows of encyclopedias, novels, histories. Then she saw it. Not a statue, but a spine of a book. It wasn't a book title. It was an embossed image on the spine of an old, green book high up on the shelf. A golden phoenix. "The ladder!" Sarah cried. She grabbed the heavy wooden ladder on rails and slid it across the room. It rumbled like thunder. The door to the library burst open. Victoria stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. Behind her was Julian and a man carrying a medical bag. "Get away from him!" Victoria screamed at Sarah. "Get the book!" Arthur yelled, finding his voice. Sarah scrambled up the ladder. It wobbled dangerously. She reached for the book with the golden phoenix. "Stop her!" Julian shouted. He ran across the room and grabbed the bottom of the ladder. He yanked it hard. Sarah screamed as the ladder tipped backward. She flailed, her fingers grazing the shelf. She didn't grab the book, but she grabbed the shelf itself. The ladder crashed to the floor with a deafening boom. Sarah was left dangling 10 feet in the air, holding on to the mahogany shelf. But as her weight pulled on the shelf, something clicked. It wasn't a book. The book with the phoenix was a lever. With a groan of gears and counterweights, the entire section of the bookcase swung outward. Sarah dropped to the floor, landing hard on her knees. Behind the bookcase was not a wall, but a small, hidden safe embedded in the stone. And the door of the safe was already open. Sarah scrambled up and looked inside. Her heart stopped. The safe was empty. Sarah turned to look at Arthur. He was staring at the empty safe, his face ashen. "It's gone," Arthur whispered. "Someone got here first." Victoria began to laugh. It was a cold, cruel sound. She reached into her white trench coat. "Looking for this, Daddy?" She pulled out a small red leather book. "Did you really think," Victoria smiled, tapping the ledger against her palm, "that I wouldn't search the house before you came back? We've been inside for weeks, Dad. We just needed you to come here to sign the papers." She threw the ledger into the fireplace. The dry logs caught instantly. The flames licked up the red leather. "No!" Arthur cried, trying to stand, but he collapsed back into his chair, clutching his heart. "Now!" Victoria said, turning her cold eyes to Sarah. "Julian, call the police. Tell them a deranged waitress broke in, attacked our father, and caused him to have a heart attack. Let's see how kind the world is to you then, Miss Jenkins." Sarah watched the book burn. She looked at Arthur, gasping for air. She looked at the phone in Julian's hand. It was over. She had lost. Or so she thought. Because as the fire burned the cover of the book, Sarah noticed something. The pages curling in the heat weren't paper. They were melting. It wasn't a book. It was a decoy. Sarah looked back at the open safe. In the darkness of the hole, tucked into the far upper corner where a hand wouldn't naturally feel, she saw a glint of something. Not leather. Metal. A flash drive. Arthur had played a double game. Sarah looked at Victoria, who was gloating by the fire. She hadn't seen the flash drive. Sarah had a choice. Run to Arthur and help him, or make a dive for the safe and risk Julian tackling her. She looked at Arthur. His eyes were rolling back. Virtue is not the absence of vice, but the conquest of it. Sarah didn't lunge for the safe. She didn't lunge for Victoria. She lunged for the fire poker. The room seemed to shrink, the walls of books closing in like the bars of a cage. The only sound was the crackling of the fireplace, where the red book, Arthur's life's work, or so they thought, was curling into black ash. Sarah stood gripping the heavy iron fire poker. Her knuckles were white. The heat from the fire beat against her shins, but the cold hatred emanating from Victoria was far more intense. Put it down, Victoria sneered, stepping back slightly, her hand still clutching the lapel of her white coat. Don't make this worse for yourself. You're already going to prison for breaking and entering. Julian was shouting into his phone in the hallway, his voice high and panicked. Yes, a weapon. She's armed. Send units now. Sarah looked at Arthur. His head had lolled back against the leather chair. His breathing was a terrifying, shallow rattle. His eyes were half open, glazed, staring at the ceiling. He was dying, right in front of them. And his children weren't calling an ambulance. They were calling the police to arrest the only person trying to save him. Sarah made her choice. She didn't swing the poker at Victoria. She didn't swing it at Julian. With a primal cry of frustration, Sarah jammed the hook of the poker into the fireplace. She snagged the burning remains of the red ledger. "What are you doing?" Victoria shrieked. Sarah yanked the poker back. The burning book, now a ball of flame, flew out of the hearth and landed squarely on the antique Persian rug in the center of the room. The dry, centuries-old wool caught fire instantly. "The rug!" Victoria screamed, horror-struck. "That's a 17th century Isfahan, you idiot!" Victoria and the corrupt doctor, Evans, instinctively scrambled toward the fire, stomping on the rug, trying to save the expensive decor. Smoke began to billow, thick and grey, filling the room with the acrid stench of burning wool and melting leather. It was the chaos Sarah needed. In the confusion, with smoke obscuring the view, Sarah dropped the poker. She dropped to her knees, not to pray, but to slide. She slid across the polished floor toward the open safe behind the bookcase. Her hand darted into the dark recess of the metal box. Her fingers brushed against cold steel, then dust, then plastic. She grabbed the flash drive. It was small, silver, and unassuming. She didn't have pockets. Her uniform didn't have secure storage. In one fluid motion, she shoved the flash drive down into her sock, pressing it against her ankle bone. She scrambled backward just as the smoke alarm finally triggered, a piercing, ear-splitting shriek that added to the bedlam. "Dad!" Sarah yelled, crawling over to Arthur's chair. She ignored Victoria, who was now coughing and waving smoke away. Sarah grabbed Arthur's shoulders. Arthur, stay with me!" Arthur's eyes fluttered. He looked at her, struggling to focus through the haze. He tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. His hand, cold and trembling, reached out and gripped her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, a final surge of adrenaline. He pulled her close. His lips moved. Sarah leaned her ear against his mouth, smelling the faint scent of coffee and old age. "The Clementine," he whispered. "Clementine?" Sarah asked, tears stinging her eyes from the smoke. "Who is Clementine?" "Not who?" Arthur gasped, his body seizing. "The bank!" Before he could finish, strong hands grabbed Sarah from behind. "Get off him!" Julian roared. He had returned, phone in hand. He yanked Sarah backward so hard she lost her footing and slammed into the heavy oak desk. "You killed him!" Julian shouted, playing to the audience of the approaching sirens. "You induced a heart attack!" James Sterling burst into the room then. He had run up the stairs, his suit jacket flapping. He took in the scene instantly. The burning rug, the open safe, Arthur slumped in the chair, and Sarah cornered by Julian. "Dr. Evans!" Sterling barked, his voice cutting through the alarm. "Tend to your patient or I will have your medical license revoked by morning." The doctor, looking guilty, rushed to Arthur and began checking his pulse. "He's in fibrillation," Evans announced, actually looking panicked now. "We need a defibrillator. The ambulance needs to get here now." "They're here," Sterling said grimly. Heavy boots thundered up the stairs. Uniformed police officers poured into the library, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," one officer shouted, pointing his service weapon at Sarah, who was holding nothing but her own terrified hands up. "She has nothing," Sterling stepped between the gun and Sarah. "I am her attorney. She is unarmed." "She started a fire," Victoria coughed, pointing a manicured finger at Sarah. "She broke in. She attacked my father. Look at the safe. She was robbing him." The lead officer looked at the open safe, the burning rug, and the unconscious billionaire. He looked at Sarah, a waitress in a dirty apron. Then he looked at the weeping, well-dressed children. The narrative was written before Sarah could speak a word. "Mum, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, holstering his weapon but pulling out handcuffs. "I didn't do it," Sarah sobbed, even as the cold metal ratcheted shut around her wrists. "They burned the book. They're letting him die." "Save it for the judge," the officer said, roughly spinning her around. As they marched her out of the library, Sarah looked back. Paramedics were swarming Arthur, ripping open his velvet jacket to attach electrode pads. Sterling was standing by the window, watching her being taken away, his face unreadable. She caught his eye. She gave a microscopic nod. Then she looked down at her ankle. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He understood. She had the payload. But as they shoved her into the back of the cruiser, Sarah realized something terrifying. She was going to jail, and the only proof of her innocence, and the vulture's guilt, was hidden in her sock, waiting to be discovered during a strip search. The holding cell at the 4th Precinct smelled of bleach and despair. It was a concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a bench that sapped the heat right out of your bones. Sarah sat on the bench, hugging her knees. It had been 4 hours. She had managed a small miracle during processing. When the female officer had told her to change into the orange jumpsuit, Sarah had turned her back for privacy. In that split second, she had transferred the silver flash drive from her sock to the waistband of the oversized orange pants, rolling the fabric over it. It was uncomfortable, digging into her hip, but it was safe, for now. The door buzzed and clicked open. A detective walked in. He was an older man, Detective Miller, with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. He didn't look malicious, just exhausted. He pulled out a metal chair and sat opposite her. "Long night, Sarah," Miller said, placing a file on the table. "I didn't hurt him," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "The DA is looking at charges of burglary, arson, and elder abuse," Miller read from the file. "Victoria Vanderhoven claims you demanded money, and when Mr. Pennyworth refused, you assaulted him and tried to burn the house down to cover your tracks." "That's a lie," Sarah said. "They burned the ledger. They were trying to destroy evidence." Miller sighed. "Evidence of what?" "Sarah, look at it from where I sit. You're a waitress with 3 months of back rent due. He's a billionaire with dementia. You tried to exploit a confused old man." "He doesn't have dementia," Sarah said firmly. "He was scared." "Well," Miller closed the file. "He's in a coma. St. Jude's ICU. Doctors say it's 50-50. If he dies, the charge becomes manslaughter." Sarah felt the air leave the room. Manslaughter. She would never see Leo again. Her brother would be put in foster care, or worse, left on the street without his medicine. "My lawyer," Sarah whispered. "I want James Sterling." "Mr. Sterling is outside," Miller said. "He's been raising hell for 2 hours. I'm letting him in now. But Sarah, if you know something, you need to tell me. Wealthy families like that, they have a way of making problems disappear." Miller stood up and left. A moment later, James Sterling entered. He looked impeccable, as always, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He carried his briefcase and sat down. He didn't speak until the door clicked shut, and he checked the corners of the room for cameras. "They aren't recording audio in here," Sterling said softly. "I made sure of it." "Arthur?" Sarah asked immediately. Alive. Barely, Sterling said. He is on a ventilator. Victoria has already petitioned the court for emergency guardianship. She wants to pull the plug, Sarah. She's arguing that keeping him alive is cruel, given his condition. She wants him dead so he can't talk, Sarah said, her anger flaring hot. Precisely. Sterling leaned in. They think they won. They saw the ashes in the fireplace. They believe the record of their embezzlement is gone. Sarah shifted on the bench. She reached into the waistband of her orange pants. Her hand shook as she pulled out the small, silver flash drive. She placed it on the metal table. It made a tiny clink sound that echoed like a gunshot. Sterling looked at the drive. Then he looked at Sarah. For the first time, the lawyer looked genuinely stunned. "You got it," he breathed. "I saw the open safe, but I assumed." "It was in the corner," Sarah said. "The book they burned was a fake. Arthur knew they would find it." Sterling picked up the drive as if it were a holy relic. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a slim laptop. "If this is what Arthur said it is, this isn't just a defense for you. It's an indictment for them." He plugged the drive in. The screen lit up. A password prompt appeared. "Enter decryption key." Sterling typed in a few guesses. Pennyworth. Arthur. Victoria. Nothing. "It's encrypted," Sterling said, frustration leaking into his voice. "Military grade, without the password. This is just a piece of metal." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back to the library. The smoke, the fear. Arthur's dying words. "The Clementine. Not who? The bank." "He said something," Sarah said, "right before he passed out. He said the Clementine, and he mentioned a bank." Sterling froze. His eyes widened. "The Clementine," Sterling whispered. "Not a person. A ship." "A ship?" The Clementine was the name of the first cargo ship Arthur's father bought in 1920. It was the foundation of the family fortune. But there is no ship anymore. Sterling stood up and began pacing the small cell. "The bank. The bank." He stopped and looked at Sarah. "The key. The iron key he gave you at the diner. Do you still have it?" "The police took my clothes. It's in my personal effects bag," Sarah said. "That key," Sterling said, his mind racing. "I thought it was just for the gate. But the gate uses an electronic lock that had been manually overridden. An iron key wouldn't open a modern electric gate unless it wasn't for the gate at all," Sarah finished his thought. "The First National Bank of Seattle," Sterling said. "The original branch downtown. It has a vault that dates back to the gold rush. They have safety deposit boxes that require large iron skeleton keys. They are called Clementine boxes because the vault door was salvaged from the ship after it sank." The pieces clicked together. "The flash drive has the data," Sterling said, packing up his laptop rapidly. "But the password, or the physical proof needed to unlock the legal validity of this drive, is in that box." "The police have the key," Sarah said, "and I'm locked in here." Sterling snapped his briefcase shut. A dangerous glint appeared in his eye. "I am the executor of Arthur's estate, and until a judge rules otherwise, I am currently your legal counsel. I can request access to your personal effects to retrieve necessary legal documentation. It's a stretch, but it might work." He moved to the door and buzzed for the guard. "Sarah," he said, looking back at her, "you need to stay strong. Tonight, the vultures are going to sleep soundly, thinking they have won. They think you are just a helpless waitress in a cage." He smiled, a shark-like grin. "They have no idea that you are the one holding the keys to the kingdom." "Get me out of here, James," Sarah said. "I will," he promised. "But first I have to go to the bank." Sterling left. Sarah was alone again. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She sat back on the bench and waited. She thought of the 12 by 50 soup. She thought of Arthur's shaking hand. The storm wasn't over. In fact, the thunder was just beginning to roll. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the scratching of the stenographer's machine. Sarah sat at the defendant's table. Her wrists chafed where the handcuffs had been. She looked small against the dark wood, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Across the aisle, Victoria and Julian sat like royalty in exile. Victoria checked her watch, looking bored. They had petitioned for an emergency hearing to assume guardianship and remove Arthur from life support, citing irreversible brain trauma and the lack of a competent decision-maker. "Your Honor," Victoria's lawyer droned, smoothing his tie. "My client simply wishes to end her father's suffering. Mr. Pennyworth is in a coma. There is no hope. And with this criminal having attacked him, the family needs control immediately to manage his affairs." The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked at Sarah. "Does the defense have anything to add before I rule?" The doors at the back of the courtroom banged open. James Sterling strode in. He looked disheveled. His tie was askew, and he was sweating, but he held a thick folder in one hand and the iron key in the other. "I do, Your Honor," Sterling announced, his voice booming. "I have new evidence regarding the competency of Arthur Pennyworth and the criminal activities of the plaintiffs." "Objection!" Victoria's lawyer shot up. "This is highly irregular. This is justice." Sterling slammed the folder onto the defense table. He turned to the judge. "The key found on the defendant opened box 402, the Clementine box at First National Bank. Inside was a notarized affidavit dated 2 weeks ago, and the password to this." Sterling held up the silver flash drive. "Permission to approach the bench and connect this drive to the court system?" The judge nodded, intrigued. "Proceed." Victoria's face went pale. Julian began to fidget, loosening his collar. Sterling plugged the drive in. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. He typed in the password found in the bank box. VIRTUE. Files flooded the screen. Bank transfers, embezzled charity funds, wiretaps of Julian discussing payoffs with known syndicates. And finally, a video file. Sterling clicked play. Arthur's face filled the screen. He was sitting in his library, holding today's newspaper to prove the date. He looked clear-eyed and sharp. "If you are watching this," Arthur's video voice said, "it means my children have made their move. Let it be known that I am of sound mind. I am aware that Victoria has stolen $4 million from the Pennyworth Foundation. I am aware Julian has leveraged the estate assets for gambling debts. I hereby disinherit them both. Furthermore, I designate Sarah Jenkins, a woman who gave her last $10 to a stranger, as my medical proxy and the temporary trustee of my estate until I recover." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "This is fake!" Victoria shrieked, standing up. "He's senile. That waitress manipulated him." "Sit down, Ms. van der Hoven," the judge barked. She turned to the bailiff. "Officer, take Mr. and Ms. Pennyworth into custody immediately. I want the district attorney to see these files within the hour." As the bailiffs moved in, snapping handcuffs onto Victoria and Julian, the siblings screamed threats and excuses. Sarah watched them go, feeling the heavy weight on her chest finally dissolve. 3 days later, Arthur opened his eyes. Sarah was sitting by his hospital bed, reading a magazine. When he stirred, she jumped up. "Arthur?" she whispered. He blinked, focusing on her face. A weak smile formed. "I see. You found the bird." "We found everything." Sarah smiled, tears streaming down her face. "The vultures are in a cage, Arthur. You're safe." Arthur took a deep breath. And you? Are you safe?" "I am now," she said. 2 months later, Sarah walked into the Rusty Spoon. But she wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a blazer. Arthur, now recovering in a wheelchair but looking healthier than he had in years, rolled up beside her. "Rick was right about one thing," Arthur said, looking at the dingy diner. "This place needs new management." "Ideally," Sarah laughed, "but the landlord is a nightmare." Arthur handed her a deed. "Not anymore. I bought the building this morning, and I'm gifting it to you. Sarah, you saved my life. You saved my soul. The least I can do is give you a place to serve your soup." Sarah looked at the deed. It wasn't just the diner. It was a new life. A life where Leo would always have his medicine, and where kindness was the only currency that mattered. Sarah Jenkins started her week with $42 in tips and a mountain of debt. She ended it as the owner of her own business and the guardian of a legacy. She proved that while the world may often punish the kind, destiny has a way of balancing the scales. The vultures learned the hard way that greed is a fire that eventually consumes the arsonist, while a single act of genuine charity can unlock doors that money never could. Sarah didn't just buy a bowl of soup that rainy Tuesday. She bought her future. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like. It helps us share these stories with more people. Do you think Sarah did the right thing by risking everything for a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about karma, justice, and the power of kindness, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You never know when the next key might be handed to you. Thanks for watching.